Welcome to the show. We have a great show today. This one has been a long time coming. I have finally built my gas forge. Now this does incorporate the forge burner that I built last week. If you haven't seen that video, make sure to go and check that one out. I'll probably post a link to it up here, and then also that will be linked at the end of this video. This is a very simple but also very effective design, and in order to make this happen, I definitely needed to clean out my shop. A word to the wise, don't ever let your shop become as much of a mess as routinely happens to mine. I think I clean this sucker about twice a year. I should probably clean it after every project. Definitely I should clean it at least once a month. Wow, yeah. So once I had things cleaned out enough that I could really get to work on designing this thing, I took some blocks that I bought locally. These are common fire bricks that you can find at most home improvement stores or hardware stores. I'm not sure what temperature they're rated to, but I have used them in other forge applications. I actually used them, at times I use them with my charcoal forge, and they have no real problem standing up to the heat. Of course, they behave a little differently than true refractory bricks, those soft, light bricks that are made for this purpose. Those will tend to hold in the heat and reflect the heat very well. They're excellent insulators. These don't insulate quite as well, but they will retain the heat longer. So there are advantages and disadvantages. I happen to like these because I could source them locally. They were inexpensive, and they should give me good, even temperatures inside the forge once I brought them up to temperature. I knew the rough size and shape that I wanted for this forge. You could think of it kind of like a shoebox, the interior part. It's going to be about 4 inches by 4 inches by about 9 inches long. I wanted it to be large enough that I could work on some bigger knives. I also have the back will open on it, so I can run something all the way through if I need to. But I also wanted to keep it small enough that if I stick with the single burner design, I'll still get plenty of heat. Of course, the fact that it's about twice as long as it is wide and tall kind of makes me want to throw a second burner on there. So I may do that in a future project, but as you will see at the end, the single burner that I built for this will definitely heat the interior of this forge. So once I had a pretty good idea of how I wanted the blocks laid out, I drew a circle for the hole that I'm going to cut. This will be the spot where I run the business end of my burner down through into the forge. You'll see how that comes together in a minute. I do want to point out you should definitely use a respirator if you're going to be cutting on blocks like this. In fact, anytime you're using a grinder, it's a pretty good idea to have breathing protection. I got this respirator on Amazon. It was extremely cheap. I don't remember the exact price I paid for it, but it was much less expensive online than the ones that I've seen locally. So I will put a link in the description below. I have an Amazon affiliate account, so if you happen to use that link and you buy this or buy something else while you're there, I do get a small commission off of that. But whether you buy through my link or buy some other way, I would very much encourage you to use adequate breathing protection, especially on something like this that's kicking up all kinds of dust and potentially particles that are harmful to your lungs. To do the cutting here, I just used an old worn metal cutting disc. They do have masonry discs, but these bricks are pretty soft, so I figured I'd use a worn out cutting disc. Now the idea here is that I would weld the flare end of the burner to a piece of metal with a hole cut in it, and that would sit directly on the top of the forge. And then this piece of metal forms sort of the center of the framework that will frame in the top part of the forge. I have seen a couple of other forges where they created the main body of the forge out of bricks and then kind of welded around that using angle iron and some plate steel. I liked that approach. I felt like it gave me the most flexibility in terms of designing and maybe changing up the design as I went. So once I had that top part finished, I did some tests just to see if the overall design seemed to be sound, make sure that I had enough heat to really heat up a piece of metal quickly in the interior space of the forge. Everything seemed to work pretty well, but I did make one design change. I decided to bring the walls in. It's pretty subtle, but I think you can see it here. I decided to bring the walls in so that they fit flush directly underneath those top 2 bricks. So for the floor of the forge, I then needed to take about 1/2 inch off the side of one of these smaller bricks, and then that fit neatly inside the forge. My plan here is to leave that loose, and if it ever wears out, cracks, breaks, needs to be replaced, it should be pretty easy to just shave 1/2 inch off another one and drop it right into place. So the hole that I had cut through the 2 bricks on the top, I really didn't want that to be exposed directly to the flames coming out of the forge burner. I felt that could create some premature wear on those bricks. So I went out and got a 1 1/4 inch pipe nipple. I think this one was 3 inches long, and I just needed to trim off the end of it, and that actually screwed into place in the bell reducer that forms the flare on the end of the forge burner. And once I had that trimmed to the right length, that actually worked out really well. Next, I built a frame for the bottom of the forge. This is really just to hold everything together and add a little support. I've seen this technique before where you cut notches into a piece of angle iron and then you bend it. Unfortunately, I didn't do real precise measurements, so I kind of wound up having to do a lot more little kind of going back in and fixing my mistake and whatever. And you'll even see in one spot here, I flexed it back and forth too many times and the piece actually broke. But it's not really any harm done because I can just weld it up. So finishing out the frame took just a little bit of tweaks here and there and a little bit of welding. It actually came together pretty well. My welding skills aren't the greatest, so I'm not really convinced that this forge is going to win any beauty contests. But I was able to get everything welded together securely, and I think the overall design works pretty well. As you can see, I kind of cut out pieces and fit them together to make sure we had good, strong corners. And one thing you'll note here, if you're paying close attention, I didn't actually weld the bottom of the frame to these sort of legs that come down from the top of the frame. Now I did that on purpose because once I had the whole frame together, the only real way to change bricks out, at least the easiest way to change the bricks out, would be if I can remove the entire top, and then I can change out whatever bricks need to be changed. And because of the way the bricks fit together and overlap, the forge is actually perfectly secure without having to have top and bottom welded together. So once I had all the welding finished and cleaned up, I got a bead brush and went over and cleaned up the welds. You know, somebody once told me that if you have to use a grinder after you're done welding, then you're a grinder, not a welder. But nobody ever said anything to me about a bead brush, so I figure I can use the bead brush and still try to claim I'm a welder. So with that done, I just lit up the forge and tried it at different pressures. I do have some questions, probably some questions that some of you might be able to answer. One thing I've noticed is that as I increase pressure, I see a lot more of the flames actually coming out of the forge. And I know that any of the gases that are being burned up outside the forge are obviously just completely going to waste. So although I do like the performance of the forge, it definitely works very quickly at heating up pieces of metal. I feel like I could get better efficiency and better performance if I really maximize the amount of burn that takes place inside the forge itself. So if any of you have experience with that and maybe with fine-tuning a forge like this, I would love to hear from you and get your thoughts. While I was researching this, I also did see a couple of designs where people had a special feature in the end of their flare. One guy used like a sink strainer, but he welded that into the end of his flare. And he felt that that gave him better mixing of the gases, which led to a more complete burn inside the forge. So I guess I'll put that question to you if you're familiar with how these things work. Have you tried a forge that has that type of design? Do you think there's any real advantage to that? Or really any other suggestions you might have for me for modifications? But I guess that's it for today. I do want to say that if you decide you want to build a forge like this at home, you'll be working with extremely flammable gases. There are all sorts of different ways that a project like this can go wrong. So it's very important that you know what you're doing. And of course, be sure to check into any laws that might apply. Get online, do some research, make sure you're okay doing a project like this, and be sure to keep everything safe and legal. Thanks again for watching. Hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, please throw me a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't. I would love to have you as a part of this growing community. And with that, I'll say have a wonderful day, and we'll see you in the next video.